Well, good morning and welcome to the latest in the series of the Knowledge Miles lectures under the guidance of the 695th Lord Mayor of London, Professor Michael Manelli. We have a session today on globalising net zero aviation, leveraging the City of London to meet Paris. And it's really notable, I think, that the livery companies have an inter-livery Green Aviation task group, and they have kindly provided our content for today. You'll probably know me. I'm Mike Wardle. I'm Chief Executive at ZN. My job today is to moderate the session and to go through the, the housekeeping for you. The program is very simple. After my brief introductions, I'll be getting out of the way so that we can hear from our keynote presenters, Dr. Shen Wang, Captain Robert Seaman, Captain Paul Heathcote, who will be taking us through the presentation. After their presentation, there'll be time for question and answers. If you haven't used the GoToWebinar system before, the way to put in a question or make an observation is to find the questions tab on the dashboard on your screen, type in your question, that will come to us and we'll field those during the Q&A session. And please do keep your questions coming during the presentation. Don't lose that thought, actually get it down and we'll take those comments as we go. The session is being recorded today, so there'll be an opportunity for you to go back and re-watch if you've missed something, or indeed to share the presentation with friends and colleagues who may be interested in the agenda. And that recording will be available on the website in around 24 hours. Final piece of housekeeping, just to say, if you do ask a question today, we will pass on contact details to our presenters, so that if there's a need for any follow-up discussion or communication, that can be made easier. So I'm delighted to welcome today's speakers, Dr. Shen Wang, who's Senior Researcher at the Green Development Institute in Hong Kong, Captain Robert Seaman, the Chair of the Green Aviation Task Group and Director of Greentail, and Captain Paul Heathcote, Senior Consultant at Greentail. You're very welcome, all of you. I think, Robert, you're going to kick us off, and so the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. So slight technical issues, but globalising net zero aviation, leveraging London to meet Paris. So the Green Aviation Task Group brings to bear the interdisciplinary expertise of multiple City of London livery companies. And the purpose is to understand how aviation, which is a hard to decarbonise sector, can transition to net zero, and to do that on a global scale whilst minimising the impact on nature and ensuring profitability of the airline. Airlines work on slim profitability margins, and so they need the capital to reinvest in a net zero future. Involved in the interlivery task group are the air pilots, the scientific instrument makers, and the liverymen of both, the engineers, the bankers, fuelers, investment managers, and technologists. And this year, I'm pleased to say that we've started a collaboration with China under the existing engagement between the city and China. And that's to encourage the global perspective on transitioning, but also to understand how China is playing its part in transitioning its aviation sector. And it's very great to have Dr. Shen Wang with us today to contribute to this presentation. If I could have the next slide session. So the Lord Mayor has given us a mandate to explore a few things with the UK-China engagement in the Green Aviation Task Group. And first, let's demonstrate the potential of an apolitical cooperation in advancing the aviation industry's transition to a sustainable net zero future. Set a global standard for cooperation. It's ambitious, but can we do it? Scope an asset-orientated green aviation finance ecosystem. And that offering solutions for fleet acquisition, improving system efficiency, an often forgotten part of net zero transition, and also connecting us to a robust carbon market. Voluntary, compliant, or is there another type of market, as we'll explore today in this discussion, that we can participate in? Also explore ways to minimize investment risk with maximizing returns in a carbon efficient manner, and position aviation from what's sometimes seen as a hard to decarbonize industry that some might want to divest into a leader in its energy transition and its energy requirements. So I'd like to hand over to Dr. Shen to give us the Chinese perspective on this relationship now.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. Nice to meet you, everyone. Following Robert's very kind introduction, so China's perspective on aviation industry decarbonization encompasses the following three important aspects. The first one is the SAF adoption. So as you probably saw the news on September 19th, so CAAC, Civil Aviation Administration of China, has already started the pilot program. And so basically in 4 airports, 12 flights starting to use SAF. So this is a very good start. The second thing is in China now, there are a lot of SAF projects spurring in the last few months and also in the past 1 year with it. So mainly in the using the HEVA or FT technical approach. Although HEVA and FT is very hard to scale up the SAF production. But meanwhile, we also adopt the alcohol to jet, abbreviated as A2J or P2L, power to liquid projects. So using the abundance, for example, the green electricity in the north and also the northwestern part of China to develop the P2L projects. The third aspect, last but not least, is the carbon markets. So the carbon markets of China has also a very big intersection with the book and claim system, because book and claim system includes a called the green registry. This green registry is also the underlying concept of the carbon assets. So basically using the book and claim and the carbon market to further facilitate the SAF development and also SAF adoption in China and also worldwide. And yes, okay, I will stop here and I will hand over to Robert.
Thank you. If I could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So why should we be interested in aviation from a broader perspective of finance and investment or other areas? Well, it's really an indicator of deeper challenges and systemic issues globally in transitioning to net zero, and it exacerbates these issues because it's hard to decarbonize. There are deep structural challenges that are slowing down and sometimes inhibiting the transition of aviation to net zero, and some are paradoxical. To name but a few that intersect with each other, with green energy availability, technology readiness, carbon market integrity, green taxonomies and indices, slow market penetration, myopic national interests, and also the trillions of capital requirements that are needed to transition both energy and aviation itself onto the net zero transition pathway. Next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Paul.
Well, good morning, everyone. Very good to see you all. Thank you for coming to listen to us. The global perspective for aviation is vital. Aviation can take a lead in the energy through finance, investment, and trading. System science is showing that focusing on component parts too early should be avoided. And equally, it's fair to observe that there's a severe global green energy shortage, and aviation will place an additional 12,000 terawatt hours or thereabouts demand by 2050. And currently, the globe produces some 9 to 12,000 terawatt hours of green and renewable energy. And this is a critical step before new bespoke aviation solutions are delivered and require institutional capital investment now to deliver nuclear, renewables, carbon capture, reforestation, and hydrogen infrastructure, all from 2035. And the estimated global spend between now and then is some $2 to $3 trillion. So what I'd like to do is hand over to Dr. Shen again to observe what Chinese progress is on renewables and nuclear and their relationship to sustainable aviation and carbon trading.
All right, thank you, Paul. And so in China, as you probably saw many news in the past few years, since the formal announcement of the carbon neutrality goal in 2060, since 2020, the year. So China has developed a lot of renewable energy projects, ranging from the wind projects to solar and also to energy storage. Now to for example, the green methanol projects. The green methanol basically to decarbonize the shipping industry in a very similar fashion as the SAF to decarbonize the aviation industry. So basically in different sectors, ranging from agriculture to transportation, to buildings, to industrial, and also to power grid. So there are a lot of momentum in China now in developing the renewable energy projects. So, and specifically for the aviation industry, as I mentioned before, the SAF is definitely the most important aspect. The other important aspect is also to, for example, is it possible for China and the UK to co-develop a green, what we call the aviation leasing company? So this idea of leasing company, essentially to use the the leasing power to force the companies that lease the aircrafts to adopt the SAF or to adopt the decarbonization approach. So forming a leasing company is also a viable approach to decarbonizing the aviation industry. Okay, I will stop here and hand it over back to Paul or Robert.
Next slide, please. So decarbonising early has more carbon impact than future solutions. And I think we're all aware that carbon has a life cycle of around 100 years in the atmosphere. So the importance of converting the global fleet to new engine options is a vital part of the decarbonisation process. It's an available technology and it's a lower risk solution. The estimated reduction of some 900 to 1800 megatons of CO2 is suggested as possible with early adoption and greater impact and inflow of new engine aircraft options, engine options. But of course, to achieve this, we need private finance, and this is required particularly to unblock the supply chains.
Go to the next slide, please. So our researchers and Interdelivery group has identified what we're calling a crossover. And interestingly, for banks that we've surveyed and discussed various aspects of the net zero transition with, the second sale value or residual value of aircraft is quite important for the bank and the airline. And we buy aircraft over 10 to 20 year periods. These cross the transition period. The issue is that when an airline has finished with its particular aircraft and wants to sell it on, the valuation and its residual value is extremely important for the efficacy of its business. And I know one bank in particular has been bitten hard, for example, with the A380. What we're seeing here is a kind of crossover in our research where the new airframe and technology adoption will take a period of time to come into the market. And that's dependent on technology readiness level and the zero emission energy infrastructure available. And the new engine options, as Paul said, we are greening the global fleet. It's not green yet, but the global fleet is reducing its CO2 output per asset because of next new engine option aircraft. Those have a residual value in 10 or 15 or even 20 years. And so you'll find this crossover period and a period of uncertainty where the asset valuation is uncertain, and that can disrupt the regularized way in which airline and the aviation sector works. So there's likely to be an equilibrium at some point as original aircraft manufacturers are influenced by their customers and indeed by investors, where this crossover will be. We've seen variations in the date, for example, with the 0E from Airbus coming online or not. So there is an interesting game at play here with regards to the transition from a technological perspective. In terms of greening the global fleet, or I should say, reducing the CO2 output per asset of the global fleet, there's a supply chain issue. We've seen that in the news with particularly Airbus. Private investment could unlock this, and manufacturing capabilities, perhaps in China, might be able to unlock the supply chain. Dr. Shen, you may have a comment on this with regards to China's manufacturing capability.
Okay, so China's manufacturing capability has already built up its traction, and the manufacturing here in China in terms of for example, I give you one example related to the aviation industry. It's called a low altitude or the aerial taxi, or like the low altitude taxi. So the aerial taxi, this service now is booming in China. And so basically the aerial service, there is some leading companies in the worldwide, like for example Joby or Archer in the United States. So in China, there are also similar companies now booming now. So these low altitude, or we call the aerial taxis industry booming now in China, will actually build up, incentivize and also stimulate the manufacturing booming in China. So this is only one sector of the aviation, but in terms of the general aviation, like SAF, the SAF is also, you can regard it as the manufacturing, and also like hydrogen electric, this new technical pathway, because the hydrogen, using the hydrogen electric, although it's not widely adopted yet, but taking, for example, 10 years or 20 years, hydrogen electric, this technical pathway will be very promising. So hydrogen electric will also incentivize the manufacturing here in China. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Shen. And we go to the next slide. So what's quite interesting in terms of sustainable aviation fuel, I mean, it could preserve also, it could have a secondary effect of preserving second sale value of aircraft. But we don't know its full impact on nature, which is the emerging theme really when it comes to the environment, or potential return of investment with regards to capital employed. We know there are some issues in Europe at the moment with the pausing of large sustainable fuel plants in the Netherlands. So, there's some questions around its resilience to recession, resilience to economic or macroeconomic conditions. Investors may see this as a higher risk opportunity in the West, partly because it's built on what they already perceive as a slightly higher risk industry, which is aviation, which can be susceptible to, again, recessions and geopolitical issues. So it's an open question. It's an open observation, really, this. Debt is available, and from what we found with some banks is the debt for SAF is available because the plants can be repurposed should there be a default. But it's the equity that's much needed in this fuel domain. But I know Dr. Shen has got some solutions and some highlights from China. So let's hand over to Dr. Shen to discuss about what's happening in China.
Okay, so I will first give a brief overview about what is happening globally, and then I will zoom in what's happening in China. So if you think about the entire SAF, as Robert mentioned about the environmental attributes, or what we call the maximizing the decarbonization effect of the aviation industry. Among all the technical pathway, the P2L, usually what we call the power to liquid, is the best technical pathway. The reason behind is you have, regardless of the cost, P2L needs hydrogen and also carbon dioxide. As long as you have these two ingredients, hydrogen and also carbon dioxide, you can basically generate every type of the chemical products, and also including what we usually call the eSAF, e-methanol, and a lot of e-fuels, right? However, these two processes cost a lot. Like hydrogen, usually we obtain hydrogen through the electrolyzation of water. Usually we obtain the carbon dioxide. It's not through CCUS, but you have to use DAC, direct air capture, or people usually call the CDR, carbon dioxide removal, because and also the electricity you use to electrolyze the water, it has to be green electricity, which means it arises from the wind or solar, because the green electricity plus the CDR can give the lowest carbon intensity. In other words, it's the best decarbonization effect. All right, so currently there is a leading company worldwide, and also is very well known. It's called Infineum. Infineum is a company based in California, Sacramento, with its two production facilities in Texas. And recently, on September 10th this year, last month, the Brookfield, the giant, the asset management giant Brookfield, has invested 1.1 billion US dollars into Infineon to develop the eSAF. So this is also very important, leading a global investment into SAF. In China or in Asia in general, now most of the SAF projects are in HEFA or FT because there are a lot of used cooking oil in China. However, we all know that used cooking oil or HEFA, this technical approach, is very hard to scale up in the longer future because the global demand for SAF will be substantially increasing or, like exponential growth in the next few years. So HEFA technical pathway cannot satisfy the exponential growth of the SAF market. So which means we need scalable solutions such as P2L or alcohol to jet A2J, especially P2L. And the P2L projects now in China has also started to build up its momentum, usually in the north part of China or northwest part of China, where the green electricity resources are abundant. So in conclusion, I think in China or in Asia in general, there will be a lot of very interesting SAF projects using different pathways like P2L or A2J to really boost up this SAF market here in Asia. I'll stop here.
Thank you. We grab the next slide, please. So we mentioned earlier about the paradox of government policies and taxonomies, and one thing we've observed is that in some cases it can encourage divestiture or a lack of capital flow. Some examples are green indices in Europe where there's a green quota, and for aviation it's not seen as a green industry, seen as more of a transition, hard to decarbonize industry. And the way in which we view, the optic with which we view an industry can affect the investment in it. And so that's the paradox of being a leader in green taxonomies and green policies, is that sometimes the hardest to decarbonize sectors may find that the capital they need to invest is reduced. Other things like the Paris Agreement itself, common but differentiated responsibilities they're just policies because of recognizing the different path of industrial developments. But what we've seen, not with that, excluding China, for example, but looking at the global south, we're seeing only 16% of capital flow go to the global south, where most the renewable energy and actually nuclear potential growth lies. And so aviation can actually lead in this by using highly compliant, regulated and integral assets. A bit like what Dr. Shen was saying with a leasing company, is that you can actually use that to encourage the capital flow to the global south. Other things we've discussed, again with Dr. Shen, is the use of sovereign wealth and non-traditional partnerships to provide a guarantee, for example, for a terminal market in carbon or for a green leasing company or other aspects of a ecosystem to transition aviation to net zero. Of course, in the UK and China have got mutual national security concerns. We've got concerns about each other's countries and how we operate. But the main thing here is that we agree upon the transnational issue of climate change, and we agree upon how we might want to transition our energy and aviation sectors. So it's a good opportunity to work together. And on that note, I'll just pass on over to Dr. Shen to see if he has any comments on that.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I think, yes, China and UK collaboration is very important to decarbonize the global aviation industry. As I mentioned before, a leasing company is a very viable approach to do this. The second one is as Dr. Ma Jun built up in the past few years about the common ground taxonomy, or in a very similar fashion as the common ground taxonomy, because the essence of the common ground taxonomy is basically to incentivize the capital flow between, for example, the UK and China, or the European market and China, and recognizing the common ground standards. The other aspect is about idea of usually what we call the carbon connect. As you may know, there is a called bond connect, debt connect, or kind of connect developed in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So is it possible to develop some sort of called carbon connect? So carbon connect between UK and China can be also a possible way. Okay, I will comment on this and stop here.
Thank you. We go to the next slide, please. So one of the things we looked at conceptually last year, which I know we briefed on in February when we launched our paper, was Green Aviation Financial Ecosystem. Aviation is not green, but this is a system that we could employ to make it green. What we found is that any individual sector can't really look at the system at its entirety, but they have to focus, for example, on providing the debt finance for fleet acquisition, trading carbon, or developing energy. But if we have a common denominator, as Dr. Shen was talking about, a connect, this may help us. And what we've explored in the last year is using the commodities market to do that and exploring how we might create a terminal market in carbon. We go for the next slide, please. And the Bank of China, Comoro, and Greentail held a workshop just to look at this and the complexities around it and difficulties and challenges. We held this workshop and we found that there's no consistent valuation of carbon, and there's a multitude of markets, tens of markets for carbon. If you look at Brent, you look at crude oil, there's three main markets, three main valuations. So there's already some work there to condense all this excellent work on measuring our performance in carbon reduction and carbon, the value of carbon, the value of nature, into actually a real market that could be traded on an international basis. The graph here is a good example of how different optics can, or different ways of measuring can affect our optic about a sector. This is the Transition Pathway Initiative, which was, I think, launched on the London Stock Exchange in 2023. So it's last year. And we're looking at this from an asset perspective, a next generation aircraft, and how it is performing against the 2-degree transition pathway, which actually here is a flat green line rather than a curve. The red line there is COVID level load factors. The green line is ultra low cost load factors. And we can see until the 2030s that the asset in terms of carbon efficiency is improving, well, it's better than net zero transition. So what that means really is there's value in the asset that aviation is operating now, at least the next generation assets, that could be untapped via a carbon market or innovative ways of fleet acquisition. But as we go on through the 2030s, you see that the performance of the asset almost exponentially diverges away from net zero. And that is a real indicator of the need for investment in the zero emission energy infrastructure to keep aviation on track. The WTO chief said there needs to be a common global carbon pricing. So that may be a way forward. We know there's an ETS, we know there's VCM, but we feel that the commodities market is potentially the way forward and a turnkey solution. I know Dr. Shen has commented on the carbon market, so if we go to the next slide, thinking about time. So a leading edge of opportunity, really, turning aviation from a hard to decarbonize challenge to a leader in the energy it requires and something that could stimulate a carbon market. We know it's about a $2 to $10 trillion market for the energy that aviation needs. This is something that aviation could spearhead into the future. Working together on a transnational outcome that we agree upon can reduce investment risk, maximize opportunities, and increase carbon impact whilst preserving nature. So that concludes our brief today. Thank you for watching, and we're happy to take some questions.
Well, thank you so much for that fascinating discussion and presentation of the issues. We do have some questions. First of all, Shane Trinian, just asking how sustainable aviation fuel works with current generation aircraft. Is this a matter of General Electric and Rolls-Royce actively developing engines with sustainable fuel in mind, or is it simply that the fuel will work with current generation technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's SAF is considered a drop-in fuel, though some regulation is required around it. But I know, Paul, you've got something to add on that.
Yes, I chair an advisory group to one of our UK universities, and Rolls-Royce are very leading on this particular area. Currently, there is a certification issue around 100% drop-in fuel, so we're currently certified up to 50% drop-in fuel mix. But I think it's reasonable to say that the engines that are in current production are able to accept up to 100% drop in. But of course, it's not being opened up to that at the moment because equally there's not the SAF availability to require that level of technology.
Thank you for that. Martin Crawford-Brunt has said, first of all, thank you for a very interesting panel conversation. His expertise is in shipping, and very similar conversations and challenges facing the shipping industry as for aviation in terms of the development of green fuels. And it seems like there's a lot of sectors chasing the same solutions. Would the panel care to comment? I think maybe Dr. Wang has got some thoughts about what's happening in China before we go on to Robert and Paul.
Okay, definitely. This is a very good question. So in my view, I think the shipping industry decarbonization pathway is very similar to the aviation industry because, first of all, shipping industry and aviation industry are two what we call the hard to decarbonize sectors, right? And in terms of shipping industry, the most efficient way so far is developing the methanol, what we usually call the e-methanol, right? Green methanol. If you think about the chemistry behind, what is methanol? Methanol is basically the methane and CH4 developed to CH3 and OH, right? So behind the scene, everything is about hydrogen or carbon dioxide. So for the SAF, if we use the P2L, this technical pathway, the most two important ingredients is also hydrogen and carbon dioxide. So which means if we can, in the near future, to really bring down the cost of hydrogen generation, for example, electrolyzation of water to generate hydrogen, at the same time to bring down the cost of carbon dioxide removal or direct air capture. As long as we have abundant hydrogen and also we have abundant carbon dioxide, we can produce this kind of e-fuel. E-fuel, I think, is definitely the future. So e-methanol for shipping industry, e-SAF for aviation industry. So it's the same thing, just the two different application scenarios. So that's why I think the P2L for the aviation industry is definitely the ultimate solution. Although facing the current fact, the hydrogen cost, the hydrogen generation cost, and also the carbon dioxide removal cost is too paramount. However, with the scalable production in the near future, the hydrogen cost will go down, and also the CDR cost will go down. We can see that future in the next probably 5 to 10 years. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Robert. Paul, anything you want to add?
Yes, I think if I could just comment really on these are two hard to decarbonise industries, and it seems to be at the bottom of it. There's a lot of discussion about hydrogen. Hydrogen itself is an interesting material to work with, particularly in aviation. If you want the energy density to move things over a large distance, you need to have to look at compression or even liquefying it, which brings on problems like embrittlement, which is a great technical challenge with. But I think this is where our paper reveals the challenge about energy availability, is that hydrogen is a really key component to PTL. And at the moment, only 1% of hydrogen is actually produced globally through renewable or green energy, as we've been observing. And hydrogen itself is very expensive to produce. The current best electrolyzing techniques are somewhere around about 90% efficiency. But when you start compressing it or putting in a liquid form, you can get down to like 50% of available energy that the input. And of course, hydrogen is just an energy carrier. It's not actually a fuel per se. So hydrogen is a great solution, but there's a great deal of competitive nature on anything like feedstock for the more conventional fuels when it comes to talking about the shipping industry and aviation as well. And not forgetting domestic heating as well for those northern countries that don't have nice warm climates.
Yes, I think hydrogen production going forward is just such a major global challenge. And another commodity, by the way, that I suspect will be traded in the future in the same way as oil is now. Amitash Gautam. Sorry, go on.
In terms of maritime and aviation, we've talked about the technical aspects here, but in terms of investment and risk, many production plants are combining their maritime and aviation fuels. In fact, they come from the same cut. And what that means is that there's variation in one industry but not in the other. That creates diversification of risk, reduces risk arguably, even though, for example, if a recession affects both industries, it may affect one more acutely than the other, but that kind of balances out the risk. So I think combining the two industries together from an investment and risk perspective is a good idea, and it can be done from a technical perspective. As Dr. Shen was pointing out, hydrogen and carbon are the essential ingredients, and so that's another important thing to consider.
Thank you so much. Andrew Scoutham's asked whether you could elaborate on the aviation leasing point, and what are the ways or the suggested ways to direct finance and investment towards green aviation? What are the drivers?
Yeah, I mean, our discussions have been actually around innovative financial structures that embody net zero transition and acquiring a fleet that operates under those principles and other principles that are important to transition aviation, which otherwise might not be incorporated in either in the time scale in terms of accelerating that transition, or because of other business priorities. So the thing we've discussed with Dr. Shen is this leasing company would have that sustainable aviation at its heart and a condition in its leasing. We know there are financial products out there, but they are in some way, shape or form a bit arbitrary and dependent on, the request for proposals from different airlines. We would set this up as the philosophy from the beginning, and perhaps even get sovereign wealth to back that and guarantee those slightly more, slightly more ambitious aspects of operating the aircraft on a green transition pathway.
Thank you so much. John Adams has asked whether CFCs are a consideration. I presume we're meaning chlorofluorocarbons. How do they fit into the chemical mix?
But I don't know if Dr. Shen wanted to mention this or.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? I couldn't get to the first part of the question.
Whether CFCs are a consideration, chlorofluorocarbons, whether they come into the chemical mix at all in the production of SAF.
CSC?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's other. So there'd be, is this in combustion from next generation aircraft, or is it? That's normally where we're talking about other types of chemicals being produced. And there's lots of studies at the moment. I mean, in a previous life, I looked at geoengineering, for example, and different chemicals being used in the stratosphere and troposphere. In that case, it was a project that what are the unintended consequences of doing this to mitigate climate? And there's been recent papers, one by Imperial, that suggests next generation aircraft actually increase warming because of these other chemicals. It's actually a very uncertain area, and it depends on where the aircraft is in the atmosphere. It's the latitude of the aircraft in particular. Is it closer to the North Pole, or is it closer to the tropics, as to the impact of these things, of these different chemical types? It's probably a good topic for another lecture, perhaps.
Yeah, John Adams has commented he's particularly thinking about as a coolant in aircraft, but maybe there's a need for a side conversation. But does that add any thoughts?
I think I don't know if Paul wants to talk, but yeah, I mean coolants, and perhaps we discuss it another time. I mean there's one thing on a more broader topic when it comes to hydrogen and hydrogen infrastructure. Having the cooling systems to enable that infrastructure is an immense technological and engineering problem. So I think there's a broader topic actually on as Dr. Shen suggested, H2 is the way forward through green energy, but the practicalities of its infrastructure is extremely difficult from a coolant perspective.
Shane Drinian's asked, he noted that Dr. Shen mentioned the importance of electrolysis being powered by solar and wind to maximize its greening effect. Does the panel think that renewables alone are enough to meet the aviation industry's green energy needs, or will we also need investment in things like nuclear power?
I'll take a little bit of that just to start it off. I think one of the interesting things, if you're on the national grid and look at the UK's current energy production, on an average day, it's probably around 30 to 40 installed gigawatt capacity. And the thing is, as any economy transitions to a greener environment, that green electricity availability starts to ramp up. And the suggestion is for UK, for example, we need to get to about 100 gigawatts of installed capacity. And practically, the received wisdom is that we'll need about 25% nuclear in order to fulfill that. Now, I know that may be the SMR. We're building Hinkley Point C down here, but that's quite expensive is the unit cost for energy there. And actually, renewables is proving to be a very cost-effective way of increasing energy availability. And I don't think we should underestimate really the power of renewables. But the baseload concern is going to be continually evident. Nuclear can provide some of the baseload cover, as can other energy storage, and that's an area that, again, for another call, but there's some great technology opportunities really in energy storage that I think we ought to consider.
Thank you. Dr. Shen, anything to add from a Chinese perspective?
I think I echo with what Paul mentioned is the energy storage is currently, especially long duration energy storage, is critical so far. And the long duration energy storage can be achieved via, for example, like hydrogen or nickel hydrogen. Hydrogen, no matter what, is a very key ingredient in all aspects. So the entire, you can think about the energy transition will be centered around hydrogen. This is my view.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid time has beaten us, but just to say thank you for your contributions today. Going forward, we have other lectures still in the series. Just about a month to go before Professor Michael Manelli stands down as Lord Mayor, but we are looking on the 10th of October from court to icon, how the Old Bailey became the most famous court in the world. Next week, sessions on humanitarian surgery in Gaza, and out with council tax, in with the green land value tax. So plenty of interesting content coming up. Just remains for me to thank you, the audience, for your attendance today and for your questions. And I know several of you put in the comments what a fascinating presentation it was. So thank you to you, but also thank you to Paul, to Dr. Shen, to Robert for your contributions today and for filling us in on where we're getting to in terms of sustainable aviation. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks.